Hello, this is Peter Ritter from VFE Pedals, and this is the video instruction manual for the new stereo Klein Bottle. What this video is a step-by-step tutorial on how all of the functions work on this pedal, including using mono or stereo effects with it. This video will use a mono input signal and a stereo output signal, but I will show you how to do other configurations. The unit will ship with all switches being set to the stereo position except for the input, which will be set to the mono split to stereo position. This is because I want the pedal to work out of the box very similar to how the previous versions worked, so that you could just plug in your guitar, plug in some stereo effects, and have it work. If you have a stereo sound source that you want to plug into the Klein Bottle, you can do so, but with the standard Klein Bottle, there will be an extra step that you will need to take. This video is not a promotional demo video, which means I'm not focused on the best recording setup, showing you sweet licks, or anything like that. This is purely an instruction manual. Let's get started. In my first attempt to make this video manual, I tried to explain kind of the input-output system in this stereo Klein Bottle just by using the device itself and kind of cables and showing you that way. This time, as I revise it, I'm going to stop back and think a little bit more in diagram terms and then relate that to the pedals. Okay, so there are 4 scenarios of hooking up gear that you might come across. Okay, so one is that you want to connect stereo gear into the Klein Bottle. So left goes to left, right goes to right. By the way, on the Klein Bottle, there is no such thing as like left and right. It's tip and ring, or just top channel, bottom channel. So you decide what's left and right. I'm not going to decide that for you. It doesn't matter. Just one side's one side's the other. Okay? And so that's your stereo, or mono, where you just have one signal going out, coming in. That's it. That's kind of like typical. But there's also other scenarios where you want to connect something that's stereo to something that's mono. For example, say you have like a mono instrument and you want to connect it to both sides of the stereo field, so it goes in and they can interact to both sides of the stereo effects that you have connected into it. That might be the input, it might be one of the loops where you want a mono signal going out and connecting into stereo. Or you have something that's stereo and you need to mix it down into mono to connect to. So for example, if you had 2 stereo effects, 2 loops that were fully stereo and one that was mono, and you wanted that mono one to be able to interact with both halves of the stereo signal, well, you would need, when it goes out to it, to mix the left and right down into mono. And actually, when it comes back from it, if it's full mono, to take that mono and split it back out into left and right. And so these are the like 4 scenarios: stereo to stereo, mono to mono, stereo to mono, or mono to stereo. And in the standard Klein Bottle, which I have one of the final prototypes here, the way that you do this is via this internal switch that, unfortunately, if I did it again, I would relabel it. Because as you can see here, it's labeled stereo and mono, but there's all these different sort of scenarios. And in this standard version, these scenarios are listed under where the position of the switch is stereo. It just means that there's no like anything, it's just left to left, right to right. And if you just have mono, it'll just go tip to tip. It'll just treat it like a regular mono cable. So in other words, if you're using, in the standard version, if you're using a TRS cable for stereo, or a TS cable for mono, you don't need, it can be set into the stereo position. Okay, if I had to relabel that, I don't even know what I would relabel it as, actually. I'd have to think about that. And this side, these options, if you want to do these ones, these are labeled as mono. And the thinking there, the reason why it was labeled as mono is here's something where I have something that's mono that I want to connect to the stereo setup. And so that's why I labeled it as mono. Okay, so if you look here, in the default setup, what I do is I flip everything to stereo. This is how it ships. I flip everything to stereo, except for the input. Here's the input side. I flip that to mono. This is by default. You can open it up and switch it, just because most instruments are mono. But maybe your signal path is stereo before it gets to the Klein Bottle, and then you can just flip it to stereo. And so yeah, so it depends on which one of these setups you want to do will determine how you flip this switch. You want to go stereo to stereo or mono to mono, flip the switch to stereo. Whether it's input or output, doesn't matter, you flip it to stereo. And then if you want to like mix down into or split out from, then you need to select mono. So that hopefully was a little more clear. You can do the same exact thing through the stacked version, which has separate rows for, like, you could call this left and this right, or you could do it the other way, doesn't matter. Okay, but like this top row and bottom row are two sides of the stereo. But you can still do all of those same things. So for example, say I wanted to do just your standard stereo, which is oftentimes you have a left and a right. Well, you just, plug in, say the right's the bottom and the left's the top. You just plug in like that with your standard TS instrument cables. But you could also accomplish stereo with a single TRS cable. And to do that, all you need to do is plug it into the bottom, just like that. Okay, so if you want to do this, there are two ways of doing it. You can do two separate cables, or you can plug in a TRS cable just in the bottom. Okay, now if you want to do this, there's only one way to do that, and that's to take a mono cable and plug it into the bottom, and then it will only go to the tip side, and that's it. All right, what if you want to do this? So you want stereo mixed down into mono, or mono split out to stereo. In both cases, you would do the same thing. You would take a mono cable, a TS cable, and you would just plug it in the top and leave the bottom empty. And by doing so, it's going to, if it's going out, it's going to mix down and send a mono signal out. Or if it's going in the case of this one, it's going to take your mono signal and split it out to connect to both the left and right. And so those are all the different ways that you can plug in the stacked one without needing to open anything up or flip any switches. It just automatically routes it that way. And lastly, I do want to mention, if you want to go stereo gear to stereo gear, but that other gear does not take TRS stereo, instead of it takes two TS jacks, and you want to connect the two, then you can take just a simple splitter like this, where you have a TRS on one side, and then here are two TSs coming out of that. So you can just plug that in, connect that to your other gear. Okay, so let's first just talk about the basics. These foot switches activate the loops, and you have three of them. 1, 2, 3. So this turns on loop 1, this turns on loop 2, and this turns on loop 3. Pretty straightforward. When you are in bypass mode, the circuit is actually not true bypass. I mean, I'm going from mono to stereo right now. There's no way to do that in true bypass without loading a bunch of stuff down. And so there's actually kind of a unique technique I'm using, which actually involves the use of the master knob. But I've created a circuit that should not change its volume, even though it's actually running through this control right now. But when you turn it on, then the master knob is active. Okay. And then you have the dry knob here, which just mixes in the dry signal. So let me turn on the stereo echo. And I have this, the mix on this stereo echo fully up. So if I turn my dry knob down, it should just be the no dry signal at all, just the repeats. And so then I can choose to mix in how much dry I want. All right, next up, let's talk about the controls on each individual loop. You have pre-gain control, a mix control, and then two filters, a high-pass filter, low-pass filter, and then some loop controls, and then some switches that affect them all. So I'm just going to go through them one by one. First, the pre-control. And the pre-control, all it does is it controls how loud the signal is going into the effect. So if I turn up this pre-control and turn down the mix, I probably can get that delay circuit to distort. Now there we go. There's some distortion into that. So you can see that I've pushed it too hard, so I need to pull it back. This will allow you to find sort of the sweet spot between headroom and having a strong signal for better signal to noise ratio, but it also allow you, if you've got a dirt pedal that you want to drive, that you can push it as hard as you can. But it also is there to compensate for the fact that these filters do affect the overall volume. Okay? The mix is also pretty straightforward. It just controls how loud the signal is that you hear out of the main mix. So if I turn this knob down, no delay. Turn it up a little bit. It's a quiet delay. Turn it to the max. And you can hear it can get quite loud. Okay. All right, now the filter controls. These filter out high and low frequencies, and all the effect is these are passive filters that just allow the signal to pass through until a certain frequency, and then they start to roll off. And so that's why they're called high pass filters and low pass filters, HPF, LPF. They let certain frequencies through, and then after a certain point, they start to roll off. And so the high pass filter lets highs through, which means it'll cut bass. So I'm going to go ahead and actually turn off the echo to make this a lot more apparent. So now I've turned down the dry too, so all the signal you're hearing is going through this loop with no effects because I've put it into bypass. And as I turn up the high pass filter, you can hear the bass frequencies are rolled off, and it's got quite a bit of range. The reason why it has this much range is to allow you the flexibility to do things like put effects on just different parts of your signal. So you could set it up to just have channel 1 be the low frequencies, channel 2 be the mid frequencies, and channel 3 to be the high frequencies. If you wanted to do effects that way, you certainly could. But also because the tone shaping on these different effects can make them sit in a mix, especially the mix of your own effects, in a way that makes them more pleasant and interacts with other either members of your band or just the other effects that you're using in a more musical way. Oh yeah, the low pass filter is just on the high end, so it's going to roll off highs. So you can hear, like, it's basically the opposite one. I'm going to open these up to make them mostly all the way open. Not quite, but pretty close. And I find this is a good sort of starting point, is to turn the high pass filter to 9 o'clock and the low pass filter to 3 o'clock, because there's just a little bit of filtering to bandwidth limit your signal a little bit, but it's a good starting point. Okay. Now, the other controls here are the slope, which is the 6 and 12 here, and the pre and post. Let me show you what that sounds like. This affects how aggressive the cutoff is. So at 6 decibels per octave, the cutoff is pretty gradual, and at 12, it's twice as steep. So now I've got a high pass filter, that's a bass cut. And then in the top position, everything's at 6. And in the bottom 2 positions, this high pass filter is at 12. That's 12. 6. Okay. In the middle position of this switch, the low pass filter here is still 6 dB. So I'm going to pull this down here. So it's a gentler roll off, but if I go to the bottom position, and let me roll this down so it's more obvious. So there you go. So again, to recap, the top position, both filters are in 6 dB. The bottom position, both filters are in 12 dB per octave. In the middle position, the high pass filter is 12, and the low pass filter is 6. And the reason for this decision is because it's often those bass frequencies that can interact in the most negative ways, like if you're pushing an overdrive pedal or if a certain pedal is starting to distort. And so sometimes the best way isn't to just leave it at 6 and, do quite a bit of roll off. It's actually to put it at 12 and do less roll off, so you're cutting the real lows out of the signal to give it more clarity, or have it drive in the way you want to. And so that's a reason why that middle position is set that way. Okay, in fact, it's my default position that I use in most situations, because in most situations that involve a cut, I want it more aggressive on the low and a little less aggressive on the highs. Now there is one other switch down here. It's the pre and post switch. So I'm going to turn the echo back on, okay, and let you hear those echoes. Okay, the pre and post switch changes these filters from before the delay to after the delay. And what you may notice is that there's not a huge difference when it's just that one effect. But when you start to feed these effects back into each other, there will be a larger difference. For example, if I feed this out to another effect and then back in, it ends up going through this filter twice if it's in the post position. In the pre position, it will only ever go through that filter once, but in the post position, if it's fed out and then looped back in, it ends up going through that filter twice. And so there might be different reasons for this. Some of them might be how you're pushing an overdrive pedal. Maybe you want it in the pre position to push it in a certain way, or maybe you want it in the post position because you like its drive characteristic, but you just want to EQ it. So there may be different reasons for this, but as of like for this delay where it's just an EQ control, it makes less of a difference. And so you'll just have to play with it. Now there are two more controls here, but to do these two controls, I now have to start kind of interacting with the system as a whole, because these are feedback loops into the other loops. So what it does is it sends the return, what comes out of this echo, into these other channels. So this one would send it in channel 1, so this is a reverb over here in channel 1, and then in channel 2 here I've got a tremolo and a phaser, mono effects, but one is left, one's right. Okay, and so that would send it there. But then I can also send things that come back from here back into this. Now, if only one effect is on, and right now only one effect is on, you're not hearing those other effects. I have to turn, there's two things that I have to do. I either have to turn on the other effects. So here, let me turn this on. This is the reverb. And if I turn the reverb knob's mix down, now the only reverb you hear is what's being fed back into the system. So it's a reverb on the delay. Okay? And as I increase the amount of feedback back into the system here between these two, up to the point. All right, I don't know if I was even ready for that. That means you have to be judicious and careful with these. Oftentimes with these non-gain pedals, you can go quite a bit before you start to get to self-oscillation and feedback. But if you have a gain pedal, something that's adding a bunch of gain as well, well, now you have to be careful. It might not take very much before it starts to self-oscillate and potentially squeal or do things that you don't want. Or maybe they are what you want, and so you want to play with the sounds that you can create through self-oscillation. Have fun. Enjoy it. That's how these controls work. But there's another way to activate these controls without having more than one effect on. So here I only have the delay on. I'm going to put the dry back in. So now if I want to add in the reverb, what I can do, it's loop 1. So I'm going to go over to the trail switch, and what I'm going to click is, I'm going to switch over to the S1, which stands for sends 1. So if I switch that over here, let me send more to that effect. switch it off. So that's just a delay. Switch it on. And now I'm hearing the reverb as it goes through that delay and back and forth. Okay? But if I go to the other position, I don't just get them to talk back and forth to each other. I also now get the signal coming directly out of here. So I could actually turn off the delay mix and turn on channel 1 mix, and what I'll hear is the delay after it's gone through the reverb. So I won't hear the delay at all without reverb. So, I mean, as you can imagine, there's quite a bit of possibilities in how these interact. And when you do this, you can even create scenarios where you turn this one on, then this one on, and they actually go in order instead of just being parallel. So to do something like that, what I can do is if I wanted this to be my first signal in the chain, I would send it the pre, and then I would turn down the pre of the others because I don't want them to receive anything. Okay, and then whatever is next in the chain, so here's my, say I wanted the reverb to be next, what I would do is I would turn down loop 3, and then I would use this as my pre, as sending the volume into there. Okay, but then I wouldn't send anything back here. Okay, so I'm not sending anything back, but I am sending something to the last thing in the chain, which this order is a little weird, but whatever, tremolo phaser is going to be last here. And then in here, I'm not going to send any of this anywhere, but I am going to turn up the mix. I'm going to turn the mix down here as well, because I don't want to hear it coming out here. So I'm sending it into here, then this is sending it over to here, and then this one is sending it over to here, and then I'm going to hear what's coming out of this. Okay, and I can either turn on all the effects to do that, or I can use these switches here to do the same thing. Okay, I'm going to just go ahead for simplicity. I'm going to turn them all on. So here we go. So this is what it sounds like to send a stereo delay into a stereo reverb into a one side phaser, other side mono echo pedal. Like that's the order that we have. And I have no dry signals, and it's going through like the wet echo and all that sort of stuff. And then I'll put in some dry here. Slow down that phaser. And so you can use that technique to put them in any order you want. Loop 1 into loop 3 into loop 2, loop 2 into loop 1 into loop 3, any series order you want. Or you can just use them in every sort of configuration, parallel blending series, all that sort of stuff. You're more than welcome to do. In this scenario right here that I have set up where they're in this series configuration, if I have this switch in pre, the only filter that does anything is the first one. Here, let me turn off the dry so you can really hear it. Okay. But if I put these other ones in post, now those are happening after the loop, and so they all affect it now. If I turn, this one will affect it in pre or in post, but these ones now, if I put them in post, now all the filters impact it. So I need to stop having too much fun and finish this instructional video. So the last few things that I haven't mentioned yet is that there are phase inversion switches, which just impact, it'll flip the signal over because some effects, and you often don't know, it's not part of the specs, will invert the signal, potentially causing phasing issues. And in some cases, it's just fun to switch it to hear how they sound, because unless the two signals are perfect and then you flip one over, that's an obvious phasing issue that you will definitely hear. But if they aren't perfect copies of each other, if they've been modified, especially if they've been distorted, and sort of phase switching inversion can cause just a different tonality and texture to come out. And so we'll just play with that. We'll see if we hear anything. I mean, this is a complex chain, so I don't know if we will. Oh, actually, sorry. I should say this. Because this is in series and not in parallel, it shouldn't impact it at all. If I blend them, if I start to add in these mix knobs back in, okay. And let's add in some more dry. Now it should be a little more obvious. And so now those phasing interactions are changing the textures in different ways that I can hear and experiment with. And then last on the front panel are how the foot switches work. So, I mean, it's very basic. On, off. Very basic, right? But the thing I haven't showed you here is that, and let me turn it down to just the echo again, here. Is that if I press and hold the foot switch, the echoes keep going until I let go. Okay? So let me do that again. But if I have this thing in mix trails, then if I turn, it's going to just keep going because the mix is being sent out and I don't have to hold it down. That's it. That's the whole thing. If you understand the functions on one loop, you understand that much of the pedal. And these controls are not that much more complicated. Master is just the overall volume. Dry is the dry signal blended into the loops. And then this affects, when you turn it off, what actually stays on. Does nothing stay on, middle position? The only thing that stays on is the talking back and forth between the loops, the feedback loops. That's the S position for sends. And then M is, okay, it both sends to each other and it'll go out to the main mix so you can hear it. And that's the entire pedal. As complicated as it looks, it boils down to some basic core ideas. There's one other feature that's been built into all VFE pedals for over a decade, and that's dual mode switching. And so I'm not going to be able to give you an audio demo because I'm not set up for that right now, but I do want to just show it to you. First, standard like on-off switching is you press the button, the loop turns on, and it stays on until you press it again. So it takes two presses, one to turn it on, one to turn it off. To enter into momentary mode, you just go click, click, and hold for 3 seconds, and then you'll see the light flash. And when the light flashes, it's now in momentary mode. So now if I press and hold, the loop turns on, but when I let go, it turns off. And so I can do like stutter effects or effects that just come in for a phrase and then come back out. And to exit that mode, to go back into standard mode, you can just do the sequence again. But that sequence won't start recording until you've waited at least 3 seconds. So if I've been just going, I need to wait 3 seconds to do tap, tap, hold until it blinks again 3 times. And then I'm back into standard latching mode. Press it, hold, stays on. Press it, it turns off. This operates all independently. So if I turn this into momentary mode, these two are still in latching mode. And so that's just an additional feature that's baked into all VFE pedals, and in the particular, the Klein Bottle with like its trails ability and some of those other interactions can be really useful to kind of just do a momentary layering of an effect on top of what's being played. But there are some internal controls that I do want to mention. So I'm going to flip this thing over and show you those. Okay, we have a handful of internal trim pots that'll cover, and then a number of switches, and all the switches are the same kind of switch. So let's go with the trim pots first. Here we have the pre-gain trim pots. These affect the input gain, how loud the signal is amplified from the input. Reasons that you may want to change this is if you're just using a louder instrument and need to reduce it so that it doesn't distort all your effects or the Klein Bottle itself. Or maybe you want to increase it because you're going to use heavy filtering. You're going to like really filter it out. So like only lows are going here, only the mids are going here, only trebles going here. And that might make your signal too quiet. And so you can increase the pre-gain to compensate. There are two impedance controls. This is that sets the internal input impedance. And that has an effect particularly on passive instruments. And so by default, that input impedance is 1 mega ohm, which is great for guitars and other passive instruments. And generally, like, it's not something to worry too much about, but it's there for those particular cases where maybe you want to try something that is a little lower to see how it interacts with your volume knob, or theoretically could lower the noise floor just a bit if you had like an active instrument and you had a lower input impedance. Anyway, those are things that are pretty minor, but I want to have on the inside controls over all the little tiny details. So you feel free to experiment with that. The default positions for both of these is noon, so it's easy to find the return to normal stock space is just turn it to noon. And then over here you have brightness controls. These are LED brightness. All they do is control the brightness of the LED lights right here. Those lights. That's it. Nothing more complicated than that. Just the brightness. And the reason why there are internal trim pots is both different people have different tastes, but also different colors of LED will shine at a different brightness level, even given the same voltage and resistor. And so I want, on my end, on the manufacturing end, to be able to tune it so that those brightnesses are relatively similar. And so that's why it's there. This will be the internal charge point frequency for this control circuitry. And then there's another one for the main master board here. The reason why there's two is because the Klein Bottle takes just enough current. It's a little over 200 milliamps total. So just enough current where the charge pump would be asked to get close to, if not potentially, especially at 18 volts, exceed its current rating of 100 milliamps. And in my experience, if you're getting close to or potentially exceeding a current draw spec, even if you stayed slightly under it, it does mean that it may eventually fry just from overheating. I don't want to take that risk. So that's why there's two. But because there's two, there's this theoretical possibility, which is unlikely but theoretical, where they can interact in a way that creates a whine. And so to change that, I don't have a trim pot on this one. This one runs at 500 kilohertz, which is way above human hearing. And this one will run, I think I want to say it's like 350 kilohertz at the default 12 o'clock position. But if you're getting some sort of whine as you connect your equipment, it's possible that tuning this trim pot could change that. Possible, because that's not the only kind of way that whine can be introduced. Another way to solve that is to have your power supply for each effect be on isolated, so they're separate outputs on an isolated power supply. That could solve that as well. But I just wanted to cover my bases and do everything I could. And so in general, you don't need to touch that unless you're getting some just whine in the system that's there no matter how you set the controls. And then that brings me to the last thing, and that is all of these switches here that say stereo or mono. And here's where I want to clear up some confusion. By default, the input will be set to mono. This is the input side, because I flipped it over. And all the other ones will be set to stereo. What this means, what the mono means, is that I can plug in a mono jack, and it will connect that mono signal to both halves of the stereo signal. If I'm in the stereo position, it doesn't mean I can't use a mono effect or input. I can totally use mono on the stereo side. It just means there's no crossover. There's no both sides connecting to just the tip of the jack. It just means tip connects to tip, ring connects to ring. And so you can just plug in a regular old TS mono cable and tip will connect to tip as normal. No internal switching needed. The only time you'll need to do this internal switching is if you want to change how a mono effect, mono TS signal, talks to not just the tip, but also the ring of the stereo field. And so that's what this is for. So by default, I put them all to stereo. This will work for if you have a 100% mono effect setup, it'll work out of the box, no problem. If you have a setup where you have a mono instrument and all stereo stuff, out of the box, no problem. Where you might have to do changes is if you have a stereo input instrument. Okay, well then you need to switch this to stereo. Okay. Or if you have, say you had 2 stereo effects and 1 mono effect, well then you would need to switch something that you could switch both of them to mono if it's fully mono. Okay. Or say it has a mono input and a stereo output, but you want that mono input to receive both halves of the signal from the other effects. So like when you're sending out these loops, the loop controls, it's sending out a stereo signal. Well, if you want your mono effect to capture both sides of that stereo signal from the other effects, then you need to switch the the thing sending out into mono. And if you want what comes out of that effect to that mono effect to go to both sides of the stereo, then you need to switch the switch also to mono. But you can also do it in bits and pieces. So this is my one side echo, one side phaser. Okay, so that's what I've got going on. If I send the output signal, I'm only going to send it to the effect that's on the tip. Which in this case is the echo. So the echo is only receiving that signal. But that signal is still only going back to one side. It's going back to the tip side because I still have the return on the stereo. So tip goes to tip, ring goes to ring. Since there's nothing going to the ring effect, there's nothing coming out of the ring effect, and so this is only on one side. But if I switch the other one into mono, then that delay is now going to both sides of the stereo field. So I hope that makes sense of how that's working. I could also do it where I make this one stereo and that one mono, but that wouldn't change anything because this tip is going to tip, so it's sending it to delay. It's also sending it to the phaser, but I'm not going to hear the phaser because this is taking this tip, which is the delay, and sending it to both sides. So now I got them both back into stereo. And there I've got the phaser back. Okay, that is the whole instructional video. At this point, I just want to thank you for your support. If you're watching this video all the way to the end, it's probably because you bought this or you're really considering it. And so thank you. You make this possible. I'm super excited to get this into your hands. And just let me know how you're using it. You can leave me a comment below or question. If you have questions you need more timely responses to, please reach out via email at sales@vfepedals.com. Thanks for watching.